This week you talked to a stranger and thought nothing of it. Someone handed you coffee. Someone sat next to you and shared an armrest for 3 hours. Maybe you typed with a person on the other side of the planet whose language you do not speak, and a little box translated it for you. Now go back 30,000 years. A shape appears at the tree line. A person you have never seen. Nobody sent a message ahead. There is no shared language, no law, no police, nobody to call. And you have about 3 seconds to decide what this is. Because for almost all of human history, a new face was not normal. It was an event. Most people spent their whole lives inside a group of maybe 30 relatives and knew the roughly 150 people in their wider world by name, by walk, by cough. You will see more strangers before lunch tomorrow than some ancestors met in a lifetime. So what actually happened in that moment? Did they attack, run, trade? And how did small bands scattered across empty continents end up connected by friendships, gifts, and marriages across hundreds of kilometers? The answer rewrites what you think prehistoric life was. Let's go. First, get the scale right, because everything else depends on it. For more than 99% of our history, people lived in bands, small, mobile groups, usually somewhere between 20 and 50 people, moving across a home range following animals, water, and ripening plants. Everyone in that group was known from birth. You knew whose footprints those were. You could read a mood from across a clearing. The anthropologist Robin Dunbar is famous for a number attached to this, roughly 150. That is about the maximum number of stable, meaningful relationships a human brain seems built to hold at once. Not people you have heard of, people you actually have a relationship with, whose history with you sits in your head. That was the size of the ancient social world. One band you lived with, and a wider web of about 150 humans you genuinely knew. Compare it to your Tuesday. You leave your home and pass strangers on the street, strangers on the train, a stranger who makes your food, hundreds of unknown faces in a single morning, and your brain does not even bother filing most of them. Your ancestors would have needed a lie down. Now put the shape at the tree line back in the picture. In a world of 150 known faces, an unknown one is far more than unfamiliar. It is an emergency, in the most literal sense. Something is emerging from outside every category you have. And here is what almost nobody gets right about that moment. The popular version is that ancient humans attacked strangers on sight. Two groups meet, everyone grabs a spear, the end. And you can see why the story is popular because there is real evidence of conflict in the record. Some burial sites show groups that clearly came to a bad end during a raid. When two groups needed the same lake, the same valley, the same herd, things could go very wrong. But that story collapses the moment archaeologists look at what people were carrying. Obsidian is volcanic glass. It comes from specific volcanoes and nowhere else, so a blade made from it is basically stamped with its home address. And obsidian blades turn up hundreds of kilometers from any volcano. Seashells turn up deep inland in places where the owner had never seen the ocean. Shell beads used as ornaments have been found in Morocco dated to roughly 82,000 years ago, and marine shells traveled across Europe in later periods, showing up in graves more than 2,000 kilometers from the coastline they came from. Sit with what that means because it is not a small thing. Objects like these did not walk. Every kilometer of that journey was a moment where one person handed something valuable to a person from another group. And then that person did it again, and again, hundreds of times, across generations, between people who did not share a language or a family. You cannot build a trade route with people you attack on sight. Those beads are physical proof that the default was not violence. The default was, with enormous caution, contact. So how do you make contact with someone when there are no words in common? This is where ancient humans get genuinely impressive. The first move was almost never to walk up and say hello. The first move was to watch. These were people who read the landscape for a living. From a safe distance, you could learn an enormous amount without showing yourself. Smoke told you a camp size. Tracks told you how many adults, how heavy, how fast, and which direction. Sound carried the rest. Voices, tool work, the general shape of the group. That watching could last hours, sometimes days. Only after building a picture did anyone step out. And when they did step out, both sides were running the same problem in reverse. Both nervous systems were screaming. One sudden move could set off a chain of events that neither group actually wanted. So, humans converged, all over the world, on the same set of signals. Distance first, stay visible, do not rush. Then the body. Weapons lowered or set on the ground, hands open, raised, empty. Movements slow enough to be read. Then sound. Not words, but tone. A pitch and rhythm that says question, not threat. You still run this software. The open hand is the reason you shake hands. It started as proof you were not holding anything. 40,000 years of first contact protocol compressed into 2 seconds of grip. And the smile is even stranger. In many primates, baring your teeth is not joy. It is an appeasement signal, a way of telling someone bigger that you are no trouble. Humans took a nervous grimace and turned it into a greeting. When you smile at a stranger in an elevator, you are performing an ancient gesture that means, roughly, please note that I am not going to bite you. Then comes the move that shows up on every continent: food. Offering something to eat is the single most common opening in first contact across human societies that had no possible knowledge of each other. And it is elegant, because sharing a meal solves the problem in one gesture. You cannot poison a person and eat from the same bowl. You cannot hold a weapon and hand over bread. A shared meal takes two bodies on high alert and slowly walks them both down. Which is why, thousands of years later, you still cannot make a business deal without lunch. There was a second tool that worked just as well, and it is the reason humans everywhere do something that looks, from the outside, completely pointless. Dancing. Moving in time with other people does something measurable to a nervous system. Synchronized movement lowers the sense of threat and raises the feeling of being on the same side, which is why armies march, crowds chant, and every culture on the planet independently decided that the correct thing to do when meeting another group is to form up and move together in rhythm. Two bands that danced through an evening were doing far more than having a nice time. They were performing a chemical negotiation, on purpose, without a single word of shared language. And it worked, which is more than can be said for most conversations at parties today. But the greatest solution to the stranger problem is stranger than all of that, and it is my favorite thing in this whole story. Some groups made contact without ever meeting. It is called silent trade. One group leaves goods at an agreed spot, then withdraws out of sight. The other group comes, inspects the goods, leaves what they think is a fair exchange, and withdraws. The first group returns. If they are happy, they take it and it is done. If not, they leave the pile and step back again, and the offer gets adjusted. Nobody speaks. Nobody is ever in reach of anybody. Herodotus described exactly this trade being conducted on the African coast in the ancient world, and versions of it turn up in accounts from many regions. It is a complete economic system built by people who did not trust each other enough to stand in the same clearing. And it works, because trust was optional and reputation was not. Think about the sheer nerve of the last step, walking away and leaving your goods in the open, betting on the honesty of a person you have never seen and cannot name. Congratulations! Your ancestors invented online shopping, and their delivery service was more reliable than yours. Now let us get to the part the cartoons never show. These bands were not isolated, they were networked. The anthropologist Kim Hill and his colleagues studied the social structure of living hunter-gatherer societies and found something that broke the old picture. A band is not a lump of close relatives. In the groups they measured, most of the adults living together were not close bloodkin at all. People move. They spend a season with one group, marry into another, come back, bring a cousin, take a friend. Membership flows. That is genuinely unusual. Most social mammals live in groups built out of tight family lines and treat outsiders as a problem to be removed. Humans built something else, a loose, leaky, endlessly reshuffling web where the boundary between us and them is crossed constantly, in both directions on purpose. There is a very hard biological reason it had to work that way. Do the math on a band of 30 people. If your group only ever pairs off internally, then within a few generations, everyone is marrying a close relative, and the outcome is not good. Fertility drops. Rare inherited problems start appearing. Small, isolated populations wither. The escape route is the only one there is. You have to find partners outside your group, which means the terrifying stranger at the tree line was not only a possible threat, he was, quite often, the entire future of your bloodline walking toward you. And we know ancient people were doing this deliberately, because of a burial site in Russia called Sungir, dated to roughly 34,000 years ago. A team led by the geneticist Eska Willerslev sequenced the genomes of individuals buried there, including 2 young people laid head-to-head in one grave. Everyone expected close relatives. That is the intuitive guess for people living in tiny groups in the middle of an ice age. The result was the opposite. The individuals were no closer than second cousins. There were no parent and child pairs, no siblings, no close family links at all in the group. Which means these people, deep in the Ice Age, with no writing and no science, had already worked out that you must not pair up inside your own family, and had built a functioning system to prevent it. Population modeling suggests a group needs to be plugged into a mating network of very roughly a few hundred people to stay healthy long-term. For a band of 30, that is not optional socializing. That is a required, maintained relationship with something like 10 other bands permanently. And Sung here shows how seriously they took the connection. Those burials are covered in more than 10,000 hand-carved beads of mammoth ivory, plus pendants and spears made from straightened tusks. That is an extraordinary amount of labor. Whatever was being marked there, the arrangements between groups were not casual admin, they were ceremony. So they had to meet strangers. They had to bring some of them inside. But how do you keep a relationship alive with a group you see once a year across 2 days of walking when you cannot send a message? You give them things, constantly. The anthropologist Polly Wiesner spent decades with the Jew/Hawanzi San in southern Africa, documenting a gift exchange system called Sharo. Here is how it works. You form a partnership with someone in another group. Over the years, you exchange gifts, not trade. There is no price, no haggling, no exchange rate, and importantly, no immediate return. You give a good arrow, a bead necklace, a knife. Months or years later, something comes back. People maintained many of these partnerships, and the network stretched across long distances, connecting groups spread over a huge area. Now, why would anyone spend a lifetime giving away perfectly good arrows? Because the objects are not the point. The objects are receipts. A Aiksaro partner is a person who now owes you a relationship, which means when the rains fail in your area, you and your family can walk to their water hole and be received as guests instead of intruders. That is not gift giving. That is insurance. In a world with no storage, no money, no bank, the only safe place to keep wealth was inside other people, spread across the map, held in the form of obligation. Every necklace was a policy taken out against a bad year. And yes, that means your ancestors were quietly running a friend request system 40,000 years before anyone thought to put a button on it. The difference is that their version actually required them to show up, which brings us to the invisible thing that made all of it possible: reputation. Robin Dunbar has argued that human language grew partly out of this exact pressure. Other primates maintain relationships by grooming each other, picking through fur, which is lovely but expensive. It uses both hands, needs physical contact, and caps how many friends you can realistically keep. Talking does the same social work, but you can do it while walking, while working, and with several people at once. And crucially, you can talk about people who are not there. That capacity changed everything about meeting strangers. A group's reputation traveled faster than its members. Word moved along overlapping networks. So if a band had cheated on an exchange or attacked travelers, groups 5 valleys away knew about it before ever seeing their faces. If a band was known for honoring obligations and welcoming visitors, that also spread. So by the time 2 groups met for the first time, they often were not meeting blind at all. They arrived pre-checked, carrying reviews collected from everyone in between. There was one more shortcut, and it is beautifully human. Ancient people wore their identity. Body paint, ochre patterns, particular beads, a certain way of tying a hide, a specific hairstyle. From a distance, before anyone could hear a word, that visual code answered the first question, which was not "who are you?" but "whose are you?" It marked which network you belonged to, which meant it marked who would come looking if you did not come home. A person wearing the ornaments of a group 3 valleys over was carrying a quiet message that harming them had a return address. You do the same thing, by the way, every morning when you pick clothes that tell strangers which tribe you run with. The difference is that theirs actually kept them alive. With no courts, no contracts, and no enforcement of any kind, reputation was the only thing keeping the whole system honest, because your standing was not with one group, it was with the entire network your survival depended on. Cheat once, and the map closes. You have a version of this, and you call it checking someone's reviews before you order. Your ancestors had a review system too. The difference is that a bad rating did not cost them a refund, it cost them access to water in a drought. Now the honest part, because this was not a paradise. When resources got tight, when 2 groups needed the same shrinking lake or the same patch of good land, encounters could turn ugly. There are sites in the archaeological record where a group clearly came under attack, and where the outcome was as bad as you are imagining. Raids happened. Grudges lasted. It was not gentle. But the pattern in the record is telling. Conflict shows up most reliably when populations press together and resources contract. When food was reliable and the land had room, the same landscape fills with exchanged goods, ornaments from far away, and people buried far from where they grew up. Same species, different pressure, different outcome. Which points at the thing that really made us. Of all the human species that have existed, the one that took over the planet was not the strongest or the fastest. The evolutionary anthropologist Brian Hare has made the case that humans essentially domesticated ourselves. Across our evolution, the individuals who did best were not the most aggressive, they were the most tolerant. The ones who could stand being around people they were not related to without it turning into a fight. Over time, selection favored friendliness, and our bodies and faces softened along with our behavior. In the same way domesticated animals differ from their wild relatives. He calls it survival of the friendliest, and it explains something no other trait can. Put 200 chimpanzees who do not know each other in a confined space for a few hours, and you will have a catastrophe. Put 200 unfamiliar humans in a metal tube at 10,000 meters, and they will queue politely, share armrests, and complain about the food. That is a superpower. It just looks so ordinary that we have stopped noticing it. And the ultimate proof of that superpower is written inside you. Around 50,000 years ago, our ancestors moving into Eurasia ran into the most extreme stranger imaginable. Not another band, another kind of human. Neanderthals had been living there for hundreds of thousands of years, with large brains, tools, fire, and their own culture. 2 different human species stood looking at each other across a landscape neither owned, with no shared language and no category for what the other one was. And what happened is not what the old story said. Genetics shows they did not simply replace one another, they mixed. Today, everyone whose ancestry traces outside Africa carries roughly 1 to 2% Neanderthal DNA, and some of those inherited genes still affect immune function and how we handle cold. Read that again, because it is the strongest possible answer to our question. The single most alien stranger our species has ever encountered did not become an enemy in the long run. They became family. That is in your genome right now. So let us come back to you. You live at the far end of that experiment. You are the descendant of 10,000 generations who solved the stranger problem well enough to survive. And you inherited a world where it has been solved so completely that you no longer see it. Money is a gift exchange with someone you will never meet. A hotel is ritual hospitality with a receipt. The little translate button on your phone does in a second what once took 2 nervous groups a full day of gestures, food, and song. And you can now befriend a person whose face you have never seen, whose language you cannot speak, on a continent you will never visit, at 3 in the morning, in your underwear. Your ancestors would consider you a diplomatic god, a god who is, admittedly, too nervous to phone the dentist. Because the old system is still in there. That flicker when someone unfamiliar walks toward you a little too directly. The bracing before you speak to someone new. The strange exhaustion after a room full of people you did not know. That is not a personality flaw. That is a threat detector built over hundreds of thousands of years, still on duty, still politely reporting on a world that no longer needs it. The shape at the tree line turned out to be, in the long run, not the end of your ancestors, but the reason there were any. Every stranger they carefully decided not to fight became a trading partner, a source of a technique they did not have, a warning about a bad winter, a partner, an in-law, a friend. Everyone they walk toward is a link in the chain that ends with you. So the next time you get that small, ancient jolt when a stranger comes toward you, remember what you are holding. A very old alarm, and a very old talent for switching it off. Here's my question, and I genuinely want the answers. What is the furthest away, in distance or language, that one of your friends lives? And be honest, could you talk to them if your phone stopped translating? Tell me down in the comments. And if you made it this far, you and I are technically no longer strangers. Subscribe, and next time you will never look at an ordinary human habit the same way again.